Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So I'm going to not spend too much time on this one, but I figured I would touch on it a little bit since it is, it is a player in the space. When PWCC does something and when some of the platforms do something, it is worth talking about. It is a playoff of stuff that already kind of exists in the space a little bit, but it is an expansion upon it. But what I want to do as far as the topic is concerned with this one, and we may talk about a little bit more about it on Friday, just briefly, because as I said, there isn't too much complication to it, but it is kind of following a trend, and that is PWCC has gotten an injection of investment. So specifically, this is on the PWCC site, and I'll give you a link to this in the description so you can check it out for yourself. Specifically, they have a $175 million capital program expansion, which is talking about more liquidity options for PWCC Vault members. So today, as it stands, you've already got the vaults. So we've already got the vaulting wars going on. Alt's got a vault, eBay's got a vault, PWCC has a vault, Beckett has a vault, like everybody and their brother has a vault. I think the guy down the street has a vault. But the point is that with all these different vaults, it creates these different things that you can do. And I've talked about this before, and maybe I'll expand upon this in a different video. I have no moral objection to vaults. The only tricky part is when you have too many, obviously it can get a little bit murky, a little bit complicated. And we've got already so many platforms, it creates a little murkiness there too. But the value of a vault really comes down to what you're trying to do with it. Most collectors, to be clear, have no use for a vault really. Most collectors are going to be perfectly content, obviously having their cards, in hand, in person, or in some cases maybe in a bank vault or something, like an actual physical vault that they control from that perspective. It can be a case of maybe insurance. It can be a case of, preference of not having too many valuables at home. It could be a variety of different reasons to it. I do see some value in a vault for different reasons. The PWCC one in particular, I have personally used it, but I've used it when I buy stuff from the marketplace, when I've won auctions, and it's one of those things where the cost of shipping an item, a single item, is high enough that in reality it makes more sense for me to consolidate a few items and then ship it as one thing. That's kind of what I'm looking at for the eBay vault once they really get the ball rolling on that fully. And as a buyer, that could be very useful to me. It could be a situation where, like, I like to buy stuff on eBay quite a bit. So it's one of those things where if you offer me the opportunity to consolidate and be able to ship it to myself in one shot, that's basically what I do with Ship My Cards today. So depending on what the offering is and what options I have available to me, that could be very compelling and intriguing. If you plan on reselling something on a platform, then the vault again makes sense because it's kind of like a COMC model, but with a little bit more flexibility. As it stands today, COMC effectively has been kind of the OG vault in the hobby, really, if you think about it. And I'll get back to this whole liquidity thing in a minute, but I just want to talk through the vault thing for a second. And honestly, one thing that I have liked about the PWCC vault, and I'm sure some of these other guys are doing as well, is that if you do have an item in it, you can have a high-res scan of it, so you can take a look at it and be able to show people. And, like, there's some utility to that, absolutely. And you can borrow the image and put it on your Instagram and whatever, like, because it's a nice high-res image. So it can be handy for a lot of different purposes. And even after you send it yourself, if you already downloaded the image, well, there you go. You've already got to take advantage of it. You got to have your cake and eat it too. But the bottom line on a lot of this stuff is there is utility for this. And it's one of those things where a lot of collectors get very, very up in arms about everything, literally everything. But realistically, if you have a use for it, great. And if you really don't, well, then a lot of this won't matter to you. And that's kind of the approach that I would offer to a lot of folks. Maybe we need to stop worrying about stuff that does not concern us and that we don't care about too much. So that's kind of my off my soapbox moment. But let me get back to this here, because as I said, there's not too much to it, but there's a couple of things I wanted to touch on. So specifically, they talk about here Whitehawk Capital Partners LP as establishing that credit-based facility, quote unquote, to expand the innovative PWCC capital lending program. Really what it comes down to is this. It offers loans and cash advances to clients using trading cards as collateral. That's really the bottom line. And obviously integrating the vault and everything into it. The bottom line is cash advances and loans to clients using trading cards as collateral. Now, realistically, is there some potential utility to it? Yes. In comparison to what I was talking about though a moment ago with the vault thing, I can 100% see utility for vaults, even for collectors. Again, I mentioned the platform where you maybe can put something there, and then when the moment is right, then you put it up for sale, or you trade between each other, and like there's some utility there for sure. I can see definite use cases for it. I really don't see too many use cases, to be blunt, about getting a loan or a cash advance using your trading cards as collateral. And I don't like the idea because trading cards, as I've often said, is in reality, trading cards are not very liquid. They're just not. It doesn't matter when somebody talks about liquidity and everything. Is that, look, at the end of the day, can I take a sports card and sell it? Absolutely. But in most instances, there is a ton of friction. Like if I'm at a card show and I have the card and I find somebody that wants to buy it and we come to a deal and they have the cash on them, or, PayPal, or in the US, Venmo, or whatever you're going to do, as long as you can get the money to me and I have the card to hand to you, That's a really relatively straightforward transaction. The amount of friction is minimized in that situation, which is great, but that's not always going to be the case. Like even when I want to sell something, okay, great, eBay, awesome. Okay, somebody buys it. I put it up and then immediately somebody makes me a great offer. I accept it, fantastic. And let's assume everything goes well. There's no issues. I still have to ship it out to them and I have to wait for it to get there. And maybe there's tracking and I got to keep an eye on it and make sure this all good. They receive it, great. Feedback, awesome, move on to the next thing. There's still a little bit of friction. It's part and parcel of the cost of doing business, but at the same time, friction is friction. So the least amount of friction that we have. That's why, like I said, the vault thing could be useful. Something like ComC, I send the cards over to them. They charge me a processing fee, a nominal fee per card, and then basically you can sit on the platform. I put the price on it, and if somebody buys it, somebody buys it. There's no shipping on my end outside of getting it to them in the first place. So that minimizes the friction a certain way, but it still limits the amount of eyeballs I can have. But I can also flip a switch and then go put it up on an eBay auction, so it gives me another alternative to sell. So that is a little bit more useful in the sense that I do reduce the amount of shipping that I have to do. But at the end of the day, there's always going to be some element of friction. Now, when you're talking about this, you're basically using a loan or a cash advance. Literally, by using it as collateral, it's a pawn shop. It's a glorified pawn shop. It's like, well, here's the thing. This is how much money we can give you. And if you don't return the money on time, well, then we own your stuff and then we'll sell it. That's it. So I can understand PWCC expanding this because apparently they've received some demand for it, obviously to the tune of 175 million to establish. That gives you a lot of power to be able to potentially loan out quite a bit of money potentially, especially for this kind of thing. But it's one of those things like it's not really my place to say whether somebody should use something like that or not. But I think we're in a bad place where someone would feel like they would want to use trading cards as collateral to pay for something. It's one of those things where, like, if you have enough money for it, there are other ways. There are better ways. In this environment, it is very interesting. Now, a lot of these instruments, and Investacard does their own kind of thing, which I've criticized in the past. The bottom line, though, is if people utilize stuff like this, I understand the idea of trying to use something like this. If you're somebody who basically has a card in the vault and then is basically using collateral towards buying something in the auction. So they're trying to keep you in the ecosystem. And basically, you buy something and they give you a little bit of latitude to be able to send in some cards, which are then going to be put up for auction. So they basically give you an advance on that prior to the sale. Because PWCC's done some of that in the past. That is a little bit more understandable, I should say. But still, like, there's almost no scenario where I like the idea of using a cash advance on something because you're kind of hoping that it sells for the price you're thinking. And that's so hard to predict. There's so many variables that are coming into it. And even at the highest end, like we can only guess. When with the SGC 9.5 52 tops Mano sold, quite a number of folks were able to come up with pretty decent estimations. But we're also taking into account a 20% buyer's premium. Now, PWCC gives the buyer some of the buyer's premium, especially on the super high-end stuff. So they are going to get most of that money, which is great. But there's just so many variables. There's so many things at the marketplace that you just cannot predict. And most items are not necessarily going to sell for what you think they are. And sometimes they can surprise you. Sometimes they go well past. So did you get a good evaluation on it, or did they overdo it? Because something like a PWCC, if they're going to lend you money, they're going to do it on a conservative estimation of what the value of the item is. Because if for whatever reason you can't pay, they don't want to have to. Don't want to have overpaid for your collateral. So they're going to always make sure that they err on the side of giving you less than maybe whatever percentage-wise you should get as far as cash in terms of using collateral. So it's one of those things where, like, I'm always a little bit murky on this element of it, but there it is. So be it. Now, one final thought I'll include on this, and it's kind of the obvious thing that you kind of have to keep an eye on, is to see if, as more of these companies with the vaulting, with the integrating all these elements into it, it's kind of a one-stop shop with a vault, with a platform, with financial services, so to speak, all this stuff. What you have to kind of keep an eye on is, as soon as you become kind of a lending product, in addition to a lot of this other stuff, you do court a fair bit of more potential oversight. So this could become one of the impetuses to get a little bit more regulation and government oversight into the thing, which obviously some people really want. So maybe this is kind of a step to getting them closer to that direction. We'll have to see what that looks like, because we've already got fractional share ownership in this thing. We've got vaults, and PWCC already did do a little bit of lending, like I said. And the scenario I gave you with auctions happening right now, you win something and then you use another card, potentially to kind of offset some of that cost, but then you have to sell it at the same time to kind of make that work for you. So this is likely could be an expansion of that in addition to other services they're going to offer. But when one of these platforms tries to become a little bit of a lending service and expands that section of it, it becomes very interesting, especially in a marketplace that is slowed down in a lot of sectors, and the values are a little bit tougher to come by. They're a little bit tougher to also predict, because as I said, no matter how you want to space this or present it, these cards are just not that liquid, relatively speaking, to other items. Yes, you can get value out of it, but there's always a delay, right? So you sell a card, but then you got to wait for somebody to pay. And there can be a delay because when you win PWCC, you get invoiced, but there can be a little bit of a delay. You don't immediately have to pay. My preference is to do so I get the stuff right away in the vault so that I can then control what I want to do from there. I did that the most recent one so I could get a shipment right away. But not everybody does that. Some people take their sweet time. They have a certain amount of time, a certain amount of grace before they're expected to pay their invoice. So like I said, there's a lot of these little elements to it. Anyway, like I said, for most collectors, irrelevant. For most people, even investors in the space, irrelevant. But it's just PWCC taking another step towards a fully integrated thing. They did have elements of this already, so it's just an expansion upon it. But it's just something that has been added to another one of these platforms in the space. I'm curious if you do have any thoughts one way or the other. Again, if you don't care about it, I understand. But then just ignore it. But otherwise, I am curious if you do have any concerns or interest or anything related to it, what your thoughts would be. Throw those in the comment section. Otherwise, more videos come up on the channel. We'll do the live stream on Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern time, as we usually do, talking about whatever hobby happenings are happening. And then in addition to that, we'll see where things go from here for these platforms and if they start adding more elements and bringing more things in-house. Otherwise, that's it for me this time around. Thanks very much. Like if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. We appreciate the support, and we'll catch you in the next one.